The empty table. Thomas Walker stood in his quiet kitchen, his wrinkled hands slowly setting a single plate on the old oak table. The morning sun peeked through his window, lighting up the small dining room where he had shared thousands of meals with his family over the years. But today, on Thanksgiving morning, the room felt bigger and emptier than ever. "Good morning, Mr. Walker," chirped Helper, his home assistance robot, rolling into the kitchen. "Would you like me to brew your morning coffee?" "Yes, please," Thomas said, his voice a bit shaky. He watched as Helper moved around the kitchen with mechanical precision. The robot had been a gift from his children last year, after his wife Mary passed away. They worried about him being alone. Thomas walked to his cabinet and pulled out a dusty box of Thanksgiving decorations. Inside were the paper turkeys his grandchildren had made years ago, now faded and wrinkled. He placed them carefully on the windowsill, just as Mary used to do. "Your coffee is ready," Helper announced. "According to my calculations, you have not eaten breakfast yet. Would you like me to prepare something?" Thomas shook his head. "No, Helper. I'll just have coffee for now." He sat down at the table, staring at the empty chairs around him. His daughter Sarah had called last night, apologizing that they couldn't make it this year. Their flight to Europe was already booked. His son Michael was stuck in Seattle with work. It was the first Thanksgiving he would spend completely alone. Helper rolled closer, its blue sensor light blinking with concern. "Mr. Walker, I detect signs of distress in your voice patterns. Would you like me to play some cheerful music?" Thomas smiled weakly. "No, thank you. Sometimes it's okay to be a little sad." He sipped his coffee and looked out the window at the gray November sky. The neighbors' houses were all busy with activity, cars pulling up, families carrying dishes, children running around in the yards. He remembered when his house used to be like that. The kitchen would be full of wonderful smells, Mary cooking since dawn. Sarah and Michael would bring their families, filling every room with laughter and chaos. His grandchildren would chase each other around the table, while Mary scolded them not to run indoors. "Perhaps we could video call your children," Helper suggested, trying to be helpful. "Maybe later," Thomas replied. "They'll be busy with their own celebrations." He stood up and walked to the window, watching leaves dance across his empty driveway. The sky seemed different somehow, darker in some places, with strange patterns he had never noticed before. Helper rolled to the window beside him. "Mr. Walker, my sensors are detecting unusual atmospheric disturbances. Would you like me to run a diagnostic?" Thomas squinted at the sky. The patterns were moving now, shifting like curtains in the wind. "That's odd," he muttered. "I've never seen clouds move like that." The coffee cup trembled slightly in his hand as he watched bright flickers of light appear between the clouds. Suddenly, Helper's lights began flashing rapidly. "Warning. Unknown energy signatures detected. Multiple anomalies appearing within 1 mile radius." Thomas pressed his hand against the cold window glass. The lights in the sky were getting brighter, forming shapes he couldn't quite understand. His heart beat faster as he watched a particularly bright light seem to drift down, somewhere behind his backyard. "Helper," he whispered. "Are you seeing this?" "Affirmative, Mr. Walker. I am recording unusual phenomena that do not match any weather patterns in my database." The lights in the kitchen flickered, and Helper's system made a strange whirring sound. Thomas felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Something was happening. Something he couldn't explain. That's when they heard it, 3 distinct knocks on his front door. They weren't loud, but they sounded different from any knock he'd heard before, almost like metal tapping on metal. Helper's lights dimmed suddenly. "Mr. Walker, I am detecting multiple unknown presences outside your door. Shall I activate security protocols?" Thomas stood frozen, staring at his front door. On this lonely Thanksgiving morning, someone, or something, was about to change his life forever. Unexpected visitors. Thomas's hand shook as he reached for the doorknob. Helper rolled behind him, lights blinking nervously. 3 visitors detected, Helper announced quietly. "But my sensors cannot identify their body temperatures." most unusual. When Thomas opened the door, he found himself staring at three people who looked almost right. Almost. The tall woman in front had silver hair that seemed to glow slightly. The man beside her wore a business suit, but it was backwards. The third visitor, who appeared younger, was wearing swimming goggles and a winter coat despite the mild weather. "Greetings, human elder," the silver-haired woman said too loudly, her voice sounding like wind chimes. "We are normal Earth people who have come to participate in the ritual of thanks and giving." The man in the backwards suit elbowed her. "Linda," he whispered loudly, "remember the volume control we practiced." He turned to Thomas and bowed deeply. "Hello, we are your new neighbors from Canada." Thomas noticed that their feet weren't quite touching the ground. Helper's sensors whirred. "Mr. Walker, these individuals are exhibiting several physiological irregularities." The youngest visitor pointed at Helper excitedly. "Look, a primitive artificial intelligence unit. How charming." Then he covered his mouth quickly. "What my brother means," the silver-haired woman said, "is that we admire your robot. We have many robots in Canada." She smiled, but her teeth glowed blue. Thomas should have been scared. He should have closed the door, but something about their awkward attempts to seem normal made him want to laugh instead. They reminded him of his grandchildren trying to sneak cookies, making up ridiculous excuses. "Our vehicle has experienced a flat wheel," the man in the backward suit explained, pointing vaguely toward the sky. "We saw your dwelling was occupied and thought to request assistance." Suddenly, a small device fell from the young one's pocket. It floated instead of falling, hovering in midair, while spinning and playing what sounded like jazz music. "Oh dear," the silver-haired woman said, quickly grabbing the floating device. "Earth gravity is so inconsistent these days." Thomas looked at these strange visitors, then at his empty house behind him. His helper robot was now spinning in confused circles, trying to process what it was seeing. Outside, the strange lights in the sky were getting brighter. "Well," Thomas said, surprising himself with a smile, "I do have a lot of extra turkey. Would you like to come in and tell me more about Canada?" The three visitors looked at each other with relieved expressions. The silver-haired woman clapped her hands, creating small sparks of light. "We would be honored, human elder," she exclaimed. "We have studied your Thanksgiving traditions extensively through your Earth entertainment broadcasts. We even brought a traditional offering." She reached into her pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a glowing blue pumpkin pie that was hovering an inch above her hand. As Thomas stepped aside to let them in, Helper suddenly announced, "Warning, warning, detecting quantum anomalies and non-terrestrial energy signatures." The man in the backward suit looked worried. "Is your mechanical friend always so observant?" Before Thomas could answer, a loud boom shook the house. Through his window, he saw something massive briefly shimmer into view above his backyard, something that looked suspiciously like a giant silver disc. The young visitor sighed. "I told you we should have engaged the cloaking device's parking mode." Thomas Walker stood in his doorway, looking at his three clearly not from Canada visitors, his malfunctioning helper robot, and the partially visible spaceship in his backyard. This was definitely not going to be the lonely Thanksgiving he had expected. Cultural exchange. Inside Thomas's kitchen, chaos had taken over in the most unusual way. The silver-haired woman, who introduced herself as Dorax, though she insisted her Earth name was Linda, was floating near the ceiling, fascinated by the paper turkey decorations. "These Earth birds," she said, gently touching a paper turkey, "they change into flat versions for the celebration." Small sparkles of light danced from her fingers whenever she touched anything. Thomas couldn't help but chuckle. "No, those are just decorations. The real turkey is in the freezer." The young alien, who called himself Tommy, peered into the freezer with his glowing goggles. "Fascinating. You preserve your feast creatures in a small ice age." He pulled out the frozen turkey, but instead of setting it down, The turkey began to float and spin slowly in the air. "Oops," Tommy said, still having trouble with this gravity thing. Helper was rolling around in circles, trying to process everything. Error. Error. Guests violating multiple laws of physics. Recalculating. Recalculating. The man in the backwards suit, who had named himself Bob, pulled out a small silver device. "Allow me to assist with the food preparation. In Canada, we use this to cook meals instantly." "Now, Bob," Zorax warned, "remember what happened during our Mars visit. We don't want another volcanic incident." But Bob had already pointed his device at the floating frozen turkey. A soft hum filled the kitchen, and suddenly the turkey began to glow purple. It slowly thawed, but then started cooking itself right there in midair, spinning like a rotisserie. "Amazing," Thomas exclaimed, watching his Thanksgiving dinner cook itself while floating. Then things got even more interesting. The stuffing ingredients Thomas had left on the counter started floating too, mixing themselves in midair. Carrots danced with celery, breadcrumbs swirled with herbs, and everything began organizing itself into perfect portions. "Oh dear," Bob said, fiddling with his device. "The auto-cook function is affecting all organic matter within a 10-foot radius." Suddenly, every food item in Thomas's kitchen cabinets burst out and joined the floating feast. Cans of cranberry sauce opened themselves. Potatoes peeled themselves in midair. A bag of marshmallows broke free and started toasting themselves over the floating sweet potatoes. Helper spun faster. Kitchen protocols exceeded. Unauthorized levitation of foodstuffs. Does not compute. Tommy tried to help by pulling out his own device, but this only made things worse. Now all the plates and silverware joined the floating parade, setting themselves in elaborate patterns in the air. "At least it looks festive," Zorax offered helpfully, as she dodged a flying gravy boat. Thomas stood in the middle of his kitchen, watching as his Thanksgiving dinner prepared itself in midair. The aliens looked increasingly nervous as they tried to control their malfunctioning devices. Helper had given up and was now hiding under the table, occasionally muttering "Error 404, gravity not found." Just then, they all heard car doors slamming outside. "Mr. Walker," Helper announced from under the table, "I detect multiple human signatures approaching the front door." "That's strange," Thomas said. "I wasn't expecting any." "Dad, are you home?" a familiar voice called out. "We decided to surprise you." Thomas's eyes widened. It was his daughter Sarah's voice, and from the sound of multiple footsteps, she hadn't come alone. The aliens looked at each other in panic. The turkey was still glowing purple and floating. The kitchen looked like a zero-gravity food circus. And now Thomas's real family was about to walk in on this extraterrestrial Thanksgiving disaster. "Quick," Tommy whispered, "activate the emergency cloaking." But before anyone could do anything, the front door opened. The truth comes out. Sarah walked into the kitchen first, carrying a pumpkin pie. Behind her came Michael, Thomas's son, holding his young daughter Emma's hand. They all froze at the doorway, their mouths hanging open. The kitchen looked like a scene from a dream. A glowing purple turkey floated in circles near the ceiling. Vegetables danced through the air, chopping themselves. 3 strange-looking people were desperately trying to catch floating marshmallows, and Helper, Thomas's robot, was still hiding under the table muttering about broken laws of physics. "Dad," Sarah whispered, dropping her pie. But before it could hit the floor, Zorax accidentally caught it with her anti-gravity field, adding it to the orbital food display. "Oh my gosh, cool," Emma shouted, pointing at the floating feast. "Grandpa's kitchen is magic." Bob tried to look casual while standing sideways on the wall. "Welcome, fellow Earth humans. This is a completely normal Canadian Thanksgiving celebration. Yes." Tommy's goggles slipped, revealing eyes that sparkled like diamonds. "Perhaps we should activate the memory eraser." "No memory erasers," Zorax said firmly, then caught herself. Would anyone like some perfectly normal floating turkey? Michael stepped forward protectively. Dad, who are these people? Before Thomas could answer, Helper rolled out from under the table, circuits buzzing. Processing complete. Visitors identified as non-terrestrial beings. Species unknown. Probability of Canadian origin. 0.0000001%. Helper. Thomas scolded, but it was too late. The aliens looked at each other, sighed, and nodded. Zorax pressed a small button on her wrist. Suddenly, their human disguises flickered and disappeared. Where Linda had been, there now floated a tall, ethereal being with silvery skin that rippled like starlight. Bob transformed into a crystalline figure with rainbow patterns swirling across his surface. Tommy became a smaller creature that looked like a living aurora borealis. "Well," Zorax said in her natural voice, which sounded like wind chimes in a meteor shower, "I suppose the Earth phrase is the cat is out of the storage container now." Emma clapped her hands with delight. "Best Thanksgiving ever." Sarah and Michael stood speechless, watching as their father calmly walked over to the floating turkey, checked its temperature with a thermometer, and nodded approvingly. "The turkey's done perfectly," Thomas announced. "Why don't we all sit down and have dinner?" Though he looked at the floating table, "We might need to figure out the gravity situation first." Bob manipulated his crystal-like fingers over his device. "My apologies. Earth gravity restoration in 3, 2, 1. Everything in the kitchen suddenly dropped. Helper rolled out just in time to catch the turkey with his extendable arms. The plates clattered safely onto the table. The only casualty was the cranberry sauce, which splattered across Bob's crystalline surface, making him look like a disco ball. "Dad," Sarah said slowly, "I think you have some explaining to do." "Actually," Thomas smiled, putting an arm around her shoulders, "I think we all have some storytelling to do. It's quite an interesting tale about how I almost spent Thanksgiving alone, until some lost travelers needed help with their spaceship." "Spaceship?" Emma's eyes widened. "Can I see it? Please, please, please." Tawny brightened literally, his aurora colors shifting to excited pinks and purples. "It's parked in the backyard. I can show you the quantum engine room." After dinner, Zorax said firmly, her silvery skin twinkling with amusement, "First, we must honor the Earth tradition of giving thanks. Although," she looked around at the chaos in the kitchen, "perhaps we should also give thanks for Helper's excellent turkey-catching skills." Helper, still holding the perfectly cooked turkey, straightened proudly. "New protocol accepted. Thanksgiving now includes extraterrestrial guests and anti-gravity cooking." Michael finally found his voice. This is perfect." Thomas finished for him. "It's perfectly strange, wonderfully unexpected, and exactly what this holiday needed." As they all settled around the table, humans, aliens, and one very confused robot, Thomas couldn't help but smile. His empty table was now full, not just with his own family, but with new friends from across the stars. Though he did make a mental note to ask Bob to keep the quantum gravy boat from floating away again. Family reunion. Dinner at Thomas's house had become the most extraordinary Thanksgiving gathering in Earth history. The dining room glowed with soft light from Zorax's silvery skin, while Bob's crystalline form scattered rainbow patterns across the walls. Tommy's aurora-like body kept changing colors based on his emotions, currently a happy mixture of gold and blue as he excitedly explained alien customs to Emma. "In our dimension," Tommy said, his colors rippling, "we celebrate by sharing memories. Watch this." He touched the table with one shimmering finger, and suddenly a holographic scene appeared above the turkey. "Tommy," Zorax scolded, her starlight skin flickering. "We discussed not using advanced technology." But Emma's delighted gasp made everyone stop. The hologram showed a beautiful alien landscape, floating crystal mountains, and 3 moons dancing in a purple sky. "That's our home," Bob explained, his rainbow surface swirling faster. though our holiday celebrations are quite different from yours. Helper, who had finally stopped glitching, rolled around serving more floating gravy, processing new astronomical data, updating galaxy maps. Question: do all alien festivities involve defying gravity? Sarah, who had been quietly processing everything, suddenly laughed. Dad, when we called to cancel our visit, I never imagined you'd replace us with actual aliens. Well, Thomas chuckled, they did bring a glowing pumpkin pie. Michael was examining the pie in question, which still hovered slightly above its plate. Speaking of which, what exactly is it made of? Quantum pumpkins, Tommy announced proudly, then seeing Zorax's warning look, quickly added, I mean, regular Earth pumpkins processed through our Canadian cooking methods. Emma reached out to poke the pie, and her finger passed right through it. Cool. It's a hologram pie. Oops, Bob adjusted something on his crystal wrist, and the pie became solid. Sorry, wrong setting on the matter stabilizer. Suddenly, a strange beeping sound filled the room. The aliens' faces turned serious, though Tommy's body switched to worried purple shades. What's that? Thomas asked, concerned. Zorax pulled out a device that looked like a floating constellation of stars. It's a message from our home world. They've detected our presence on Earth. We're not supposed to make contact with. I mean, visit other planets without permission. Are you in trouble? Emma asked, her eyes wide with concern. Not exactly, Bob explained, his rainbow pattern swirling slower. But we should probably leave soon. Our exploration committee can be quite strict about unauthorized Earth visits. The mood in the room suddenly turned sad. Helper's lights dimmed, and even the floating gravy boat seemed to sink a little. But Thomas stood up, surprising everyone. Now wait just a minute. If your committee is worried about Earth people learning about aliens, well, he gestured around the table. That's already happened. So why not let them know you've accidentally created some Earth ambassadors? Ambassadors? Sarah asked. Yes. Tommy brightened literally, his colors shifting to excited yellows. Earth Thanksgiving ambassadors. We could establish official holiday cultural exchange protocols. Zorax's silvery skin rippled thoughtfully. That's actually not a bad idea. Our studies show that Earth holidays promote peace and understanding. Perhaps. She was interrupted by another beep from her star constellation device. But this time, when she looked at it, her whole body glowed brighter. They're sending a diplomatic ship, she announced. Apparently, our quantum energy signatures showed we were participating in an Earth celebration. And they're curious. More aliens. Emma bounced in her chair excitedly. Indeed, Bob said, his crystal surface creating a small light show. It seems our accidental first contact has become an official cultural exchange. Helper spun in a circle, updating protocols. Thanksgiving guest list may now include multiple alien species. Should I prepare more turkey? Just then, they all heard a new sound, a deep musical hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Through the window, they could see new lights appearing in the sky, different from before. Something big was coming. Thomas looked around his table, at his children, his granddaughter, his robot helper, and his new alien friends. This Thanksgiving had started with an empty table and a lonely heart. Now it was about to become the first official Earth alien Thanksgiving celebration in history. Helper, he said with a smile, I think we're going to need a lot more turkey. The lights in the sky grew brighter, and the humming grew louder. The first intergalactic Thanksgiving was about to begin. Hard goodbyes. The diplomatic ship turned out to be what looked like a giant snowflake made of light, hovering silently above Thomas's backyard. From it descended a delegation of beings that made Zorax, Bob, and Tommy stand up straighter, which, given their alien forms, meant they floated a bit higher. The Council of Intergalactic Cultural Exchange, Zorax whispered, her silvery skin dimming respectfully. The new arrivals were spectacular. One looked like a living constellation, stars twinkling where eyes should be. Another appeared to be made entirely of flowing liquid rainbows. The third was a being of pure light, who had to dim themselves just to be visible to human eyes. Helper immediately began spinning. Error. Visual processors overloaded. Too many impossible beings. Switching to party mode. The robot's lights started flashing in festive patterns, and it began playing Turkey in the Straw from its speakers. Emma couldn't contain her excitement. Are you here for Thanksgiving too? We have quantum pumpkin pie. The constellation being laughed, a sound like wind chimes in space. We have come to investigate an unauthorized Earth contact, but instead we find a celebration of unity. Thomas stepped forward. That's exactly what Thanksgiving is about. Bringing people together, sharing food, and being grateful. Even if some of those people happen to be from other planets. The liquid rainbow being rippled with interest. Our records show that Earth is not ready for intergalactic contact. And yet, here you all are, sharing a meal with our explorers as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. Sarah spoke up. Maybe that's exactly why Earth is ready. We're learning to accept differences, to welcome strangers, to catch floating turkeys, Helper added helpfully, still playing background music. The being of light moved forward, its glow pulsing gently. Perhaps it is we who were not ready to understand Earth's capacity for acceptance. This Thanksgiving ritual seems to have powers we did not anticipate. Suddenly, all the alien devices in the room started beeping at once. Bob checked his crystalline wrist display, his rainbow pattern swirling with concern. The quantum anomaly, he said. Our presence here is starting to affect local space-time. We need to leave soon, or we might accidentally turn the whole neighborhood into a temporal art project. Emma's face fell. You're leaving. But we just became friends. Tommy's aurora colors shifted to sad blues. We have to. Earth's dimensional fabric isn't stable enough for prolonged alien presence yet. But maybe someday. The constellation being raised what might have been a hand. Perhaps we can offer a compromise. While full contact must wait until Earth's civilization advances further, we could establish a holiday exception. A what? Everyone asked simultaneously. Once per Earth year, during this Thanksgiving celebration, controlled contact could be permitted. A special temporal bubble would prevent any quantum disruption, allowing for safe interaction. Thomas looked at his new alien friends, then at his family. You mean they could come back every Thanksgiving? The beam of light brightened. Under proper diplomatic protocols, yes. This location would become Earth's first official intergalactic cultural exchange point, active 1 day per year. Helper started playing when the Saints go marching in for some reason. New annual protocol accepted. Thanksgiving guest list to include beings from multiple dimensions, updating turkey size calculations accordingly. The goodbye preparations began. The aliens had to leave before their presence caused any permanent changes to Earth's reality. But now there was hope in the farewells. Zorax hugged Thomas, her starlight skin leaving tiny sparkles on his sweater. Thank you for showing us what Earth hospitality truly means. Bob carefully handed Sarah a small crystal, a quantum communicator. It will only work on Thanksgiving, but you can use it to let us know what dishes to bring next year. Tommy gave Emma a high five that accidentally made her hair stand up with aurora energy. Next time I'll show you how to make zero-gravity mashed potatoes. As the aliens prepared to leave, Thomas watched the spectacular ships hovering above his yard. His Thanksgiving had started with an empty table and ended with an intergalactic treaty. But more importantly, it had given him something he never expected. A bigger family, one that stretched across the stars. Helper rolled up beside him. Mr. Walker, shall I start planning next year's seating arrangements? My calculations suggest we may need chairs that work in zero gravity. Thomas smiled, watching the aliens say their final goodbyes. Helper, I think we're going to need a bigger table. The diplomatic ship began to glow brighter, preparing for departure. But this wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning of the most unique Thanksgiving tradition in human history. A new tradition. 1 year later, Thomas's house buzzed with excitement on Thanksgiving morning. Helper zoomed around, now upgraded with anti-gravity stabilizers and a universal translation module, though it sometimes translated everything into disco lyrics by accident. Temporal bubble activation in 3 hours. Helper announced, its new starlight-powered circuits glowing, beginning final preparations for Operation Intergalactic Feast. Emma sat by the window, watching the sky eagerly. She wore the special glasses Tommy had left her last year, which let her see quantum energy trails. Sarah and Michael were in the kitchen, attempting to cook with the alien recipe cards Bob had given them. "Dad," Sarah called out, "the sweet potatoes are trying to achieve consciousness again." Thomas chuckled, adjusting the new dining table, a gift from Zorax that could expand into different dimensions when needed. "Just sing to them like the recipe says. They calm down if they hear Earth music." Michael started humming "Take Me Home," "Country Roads," and the sweet potatoes settled into a peaceful glow. Helper suddenly spun in circles. Alert! Detecting incoming quantum signatures. Multiple vessels approaching. The sky above the house shimmered, and a beautiful iridescent bubble formed, encasing the entire property. Inside this protective temporal field, reality shifted slightly. Stars became visible in the daylight, and gentle aurora waves danced across the bubble surface. The first ship arrived looking like a cascade of shooting stars, Zorax's family transport. The second appeared as a crystalline pyramid, carrying Bob and his quantum physics research team. Tommy's vessel showed up as a swirling vortex of northern lights. But they weren't alone. Additional signatures detected. Helper chirped excitedly. New visitors approaching. More ships appeared, one that looked like a floating garden of light flowers, another that seemed to be made of living music, and a third that appeared as a school of what could only be described as space whales. The Diplomatic Council had approved more families to join Earth's first official intergalactic Thanksgiving. As the visitors materialized in the backyard, Thomas's house became a celebration of universal proportions. Zorax's children, who looked like tiny comets, played tag with Emma, leaving trails of stardust. Bob's research team studied Earth cooking methods, taking particular interest in the concept of marshmallows on sweet potatoes. Tommy, who had grown slightly taller and more Aurora-like, proudly showed off his new invention, a universal flavor translator that could make any dish taste like the favorite food of whoever was eating it. The garden ship aliens brought space-grown vegetables that danced and sang while being eaten. The music beings performed a symphony using Helper's kitchen utensils as instruments. Even the space whales contributed, humming a song that made everyone feel warm and happy inside. Helper, now decorated with alien lights and wearing what it called its cosmic chef hat, served Earth dishes with intergalactic twists. Quantum roasted turkey that could taste like everyone's perfect version simultaneously, stuffing made with bread from 12 dimensions, and cranberry sauce that told jokes. "Remember last year?" Sarah asked, watching Emma teaching some comet children how to play tag. "We were worried about surprising you on Thanksgiving." "Best surprise ever." Thomas smiled, helping Bob's assistant, a being made of living math equations, understand the purpose of pumpkin pie. Though I think this year might top it. The Diplomatic Council's message sphere floated in the center of the table, playing congratulations from across the galaxy. Earth's first intergalactic Thanksgiving had become a model for cross-dimensional cultural exchange. Other planets were now applying for their own holiday exceptions. As everyone gathered around the dimension-shifting table, humans, aliens, living mathematics, space whales, and one very proud robot. Helper clinked its metallic arm against a crystal glass, which accidentally started singing. "Attention all beings from all dimensions," Helper announced. "Before we begin our feast, Earth tradition requires expressing gratitude. Would anyone like to start?" Emma raised her hand, still wearing her quantum glasses. "I'm thankful that my grandpa was lonely last Thanksgiving." Everyone looked confused until she explained. "Because if he wasn't lonely, Our alien friends might have knocked on someone else's door. Then we wouldn't have the best Thanksgiving family in the whole universe. Thomas looked around his table. There sat his children, his granddaughter, a robot learning to dance from music beings, and friends from across the cosmos. The empty table that had made him so sad 1 year ago was now literally overflowing into other dimensions. Helper raised its cosmic chef hat. New equation computed. Loneliness plus unexpected visitors multiplied by open hearts equals family, regardless of galaxy of origin. Well calculated, Helper, Thomas said, as a space whale passed him some quantum turkey. Very well calculated indeed. And so began another Thanksgiving feast at the Walker House, the only place in the universe where Earth gravy and stardust shared the same boat, where sweet potatoes achieved brief consciousness before being eaten, and where family meant something that stretched far beyond the stars. Helper had only one comment left to make. Note for next year: need bigger temporal bubble and more turkey.